What is up, guys? Welcome to the Crosswalk Podcast, where we have been called to carry our cross daily. I'm your host, Paul Fowler, and today's episode is the last episode of our three-part series on apologetics, but it's also going to be the last episode of this season. I'm going to be taking a break during the month of December to kind of, the month of December can be kind of crazy. If you have, extended family that you go and see, or if you have loved ones out of town or anything, you know how hectic the Christmas season can be, with shopping and all this kind of stuff. And to be honest, I think I need a much needed break to kind of rethink some things, to kind of redo some things, to schedule things out. And I think it'll be beneficial, of course, to me, but I think it'll be beneficial to the podcast as a whole as well. So I will come back after this episode. I will come back for season 2 of the Crosswalk Podcast after New Year's. And so be looking forward to those. I'm probably... this is just how I am, and I haven't been doing this as of recently, but I would like to schedule things out to make things just so much easier to schedule out the next 20 or so episodes of this next coming season as best as I can. I just preached a sermon today's Sunday, and I filled in for my pastor, and I just preached a sermon it's on James chapter 4, the end of James chapter 4, about, you don't know what will happen tomorrow, basically. And we cannot not entrust in our plans. So I would like to say, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise, as we say here in the South, that whatever happens, be God's will and be for His glory. And so let us go ahead and jump into today's episode. Now, this last episode, I was kind of thinking about what exactly should I hit on, and I was thinking about two things. And I'm probably going to integrate both of these things because I think they're intertwined, maybe not directly in the same conversation, but intertwined, because it's like you can't do one without the other. And so we're going to be talking about truth and worldviews, and we're also going to be talking about flipping arguments back on themselves. And I think both of them are very important whenever you actually sit and think, because some of these things can actually stump us. To kind of start off, I want to talk about flipping arguments back on themselves, because I'm not going to take a whole lot of time doing this and talking about this, but I think it is important because the next thing is going to take a little bit more time. But what do I mean by flipping arguments back on themselves? I think Dr. Frank Turek does this very, very well, and it's the most common thing I hear him say whenever it comes to flipping an argument back on itself or turning an argument back on themselves is he'll say, well, what do you mean by that? And stuff. He'll take it back to the person. He'll say, well, I believe, if someone says, well, I believe God is immoral, and he'll ask, well, what do you mean by immoral? And then they'll try to actually explain, and he'll be like, well, how does immorality happen if there is no God? And then they sit there and think to themselves. But also he talks about, applying the claim to themselves. Whenever I taught logic for about 5 years, high school logic, there were these things, we talk about, we have conversations and we have arguments, and we talk about claims and truth. And we talked about truth claims, or we talked about, making a statement that has a truth value to it. And what do I mean by truth value? I know I'm throwing a lot of terminology out here, but truth value just is what kind of value does the statement have according to the truth of it. So, for example, if I said that the Eiffel Tower is in Paris, France, that would be a truth claim. That would be specifically a true truth claim. I have made a claim to truth, and that truth claim is actually right. It's correct. It is true. Now, if I said that the Eiffel Tower was in Moscow, Russia, that would also be a truth claim. I am claiming something to be true, but it happens to be false. A lot of people will put out a truth claim, and you've got to think to yourself, well, is that true? Don't think to yourself, well, I mean, they said it, so it must be true. So, for example, something that we could flip back is if someone says there's no such thing as truth. I've heard this before. I've heard it in movies. I've heard it in games. I've heard it in music. I mean, the world likes to claim there is no such thing as truth. So if we apply the claim to itself, what should we say? Is that true? Is it true that there is no such thing as truth? Now, if you are a reasoning human being, you can see how that argument falls apart. They usually try to claim this because it's like, well, you can't have the truth that God exists. So because there is no such thing as truth. All truth is what we call relative truth, meaning that truth is just based on the person or their opinion. And so that's not obviously correct, but truth is so important. One, God is truth. Christ said himself, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father except by me. And so if Jesus Christ claimed to be truth himself, I think we should take the time and to observe what truth is and to understand how we can obtain more truth. And so we need to be able to, as Scripture says, take every thought captive, be able to turn arguments against people, not in a vindictive, argumental way, but in a way that makes people think. Not to have like a ha-ha, gotcha moment, not kind of like that, but in a way that we get people to think about what they say. And I try to do this with my students. They will make a claim, and it could be random. It could be just in conversation. Because whenever I'm a teacher and I'm at school, I'm in teaching mode. And God has allowed me and worked in and through me and made me in such a way that I am in this mode where everything can be used as a teaching moment. And is that meaning that every moment should be a teaching moment? Well, probably not. But I can use, and God has moved in and through me in such a way that he has made it easy for me to try to figure out ways to teach my students, even in just conversations. I often ask my students whenever they say something, well, is that true? Or I want you to think about that. Or I'll come back with something in the conversation that makes them sit there and think for a moment. I don't try to do it as to be argumentative or to make them question themselves or to make them think that they're wrong all the time. But I want our students to grow up thinking, not just doing. I want them to think. And so, as we have conversations, we must think. We must try to understand. I've heard it said multiple times that we no longer have conversations to understand, but we only have conversations so that we can reply. We no longer listen to understand, we only listen to reply. And so we should listen to both understand and reply. We think about things. We think about the conversation at hand. We ponder on what somebody else claims. A lot of people that know me know that I love professional wrestling, WWE, and a lot of people that I have relationships with don't like wrestling. It's like they don't understand my enjoyment of it. The first objection that they have, that every person has, and it seems like they think that they're the first one to come up with this brilliant claim, and they ask, well, don't you know that it's fake? And so what should my response be? My response is, well, what do you mean by fake? Just like Frank Turek does. Well, what do you mean by fake? Well, they don't really hit each other, do they? They don't really hurt each other, do they? Well, then if that's your definition of fake, then wrestling isn't fake, because they do hit each other. I mean, there's a wrestler right now that whenever he smacks someone across the chest, it echoes through the entire arena. There's wrestlers that have come back from grave injuries. I was talking to my father this morning about one wrestler that had the C1 and C2 vertebrae broken, and he will never wrestle again, because if he takes a bad bump, he could not only get paralyzed for the life, he could also potentially die because of something that happened in a wrestling ring. So what do people usually mean by, well, wrestling's fake, right? Is that the outcome is scripted. They have a predetermined outcome. And so that's one example of how we can think and take thoughts captive in, of course, a non-biblical way. But then you have people that make claims against the Bible. Like one claim that I've heard in recent years is, well, God condones slavery. Well, no, he does not condone slavery. The Bible consists of historical and cultural truths that did happen, records of things that did happen, of course, in the Old and New Testament. But God does not condone slavery. Actually, we should actually look at the book of Philemon that completely contradicts that claim itself that God condones slavery. It's the whole letter is about, well, not the whole letter, but a good chunk of the letter is Paul trying to convince Philemon, who is a slave owner, to take back his runaway slave, not as a slave, but as a brother. That's countercultural. That's not something that our world, that the world, even at that time, even thought to be a thing. And so, no, God does not condone slavery. That just being another example. Taking thoughts captive, not questioning everything, because we live in a world where everybody just wants to question everything, but not believe anything. No, our questions come from our belief. Our questions come from our faith. Our questions come from us wanting to grow in their faith, and that's where we should be. Now, to move on from that a little bit about questions and things that we need to do whenever it comes to having these conversations, I want to move to this site. Now, I want to be honest. This site has some questions, and I have yet to read them. I read the first couple, but I have not read every one of these questions. There are, I believe, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 questions that I'm going to go over real quick. And this is coming from the North American Mission Board.net. There's 65 apologetic questions, but they're sectioned out. And this one has to do with truth and worldviews. And here's something that we tend to forget a lot whenever we are indulged in the church. And I'm not saying that this is a bad thing in the slightest, but we tend to forget that other people have worldviews. I mentioned this morning whenever I was preaching, but I'll mention it here as well. I went to a gas station this past week. My truck stopped because my meters are messed up, and I could not tell that I was almost out of gas. And so my car ran out of gas. My truck ran out of gas, and so I got some family that helped me. My brother and my cousin came out and helped me out, and I went over to the other gas station and paid for my gas. Well, I felt like an idiot because I didn't know how to work these specific gas pumps. And the guy on the other side of the gas pump who had a van. It had no windshield wipers on, and it was raining outside. So he was wiping all of the water off of the windshield and waiting for the rain to go away. So I asked him, I said, man, I don't know if I'm just an idiot. I just don't know how to work this thing. And as he comes around, he looks at it and then just flips the handle of the gas pump. Well, make a long story short, I felt like an idiot. I had to repay because it had reset itself. And then I came back out, and I had the urge to talk to this man that was across the pump that tried to help me. And I asked him. I said, "Sir, I know this is maybe a strange question to ask, but I was just wondering, have you ever thought about what happens when a person dies?" And he says, "Yeah, man, I talk to my Creator all the time. And I don't believe in heaven. I believe in multiple heavens, because your book says, the first verse says, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." Well, me, not wanting to get into a theological debate at a gas station in the middle of the night, and it raining, I tried to plug the gospel in. I think I said, "Hey brother," or something like that, 5 or 6 times, but every time I tried to start in on the gospel after that, I would get cut off. And he would try to just tell me all these things, like he's saying stuff like, "I'm spiritual. I know, I read all these books and I found the truth. All these other books think they have the truth, but they don't. I know the truth," all this stuff. And I asked him what his name was before he left. Again, no windshield wipers, and it's still raining, so it kind of showed me that he wanted to get out of that conversation pretty quickly. But he told me his name, and then I said, "Well, I'm praying for you." And he says, "One more thing." He said, "Hell's not real either. The Catholic Church made that up to scare people," and closed the door and drove off. And so this is an example that there is other world views. Our worldview, our Christian worldview, is not the only one. Now, it is the right one, of course, but it's not the only one. And atheists will claim that atheism's not a worldview, but that's just nonsensical. It is a worldview. It is a belief, a lack of belief in something, and so therefore, and the thing is because of their lack of belief in this specific thing, which is God, their worldview is going to be different. It is a worldview. Of course, it has nothing to do on what your opinions on certain things are, but you have no grounds to base your opinions, or you have no grounds to base your truth. Without God, there is no truth. There's no such thing as truth. It's one opinion against the other, especially moral truths. And so there are world views. So these questions are coming from the North American Mission Board website, and they're questions about truth and worldview. And so I'm going to read some of these, and I'm going to try to talk about some of these to the best of my ability. And Lord willing, I can answer them well. I'm the kind of person that if I don't know something, I don't mind saying that I don't know, but I'll go and try to find out. And so the first question was, what is the difference between absolute and relative truth? These two terms are used quite a bit in conversation, in academia, going to college and stuff, because people tend to try to think about these things more often. And so, what is the difference between absolute truth and relative truth? Absolute truth is grounded in reality. Absolute truth is truth that is based on unmoving and unwavering ideas. Relative truth is based upon a subject. So, if I was to say, now, here's the thing. Relative truth deals with situational. And whenever you talk about like detective work or anything, relative truth would be based on, like, for example, I'm trying to think of a great example to do this. Like, we have, a broken window at our church. And I was thinking to myself, a neighbor could have done that. That's relatively true. But I have no cold, facts that somebody could drove by, slung, like the car could have drove by, a rock get caught, and then slung the rock. That could have happened. We don't know. But there's a kind of a realm in reality that deals with what is true and what is based on opinion. Let me read the definitions real quick. Relative truth, by definition, is considered in relation or in proportion to something else, to a subject, as I said. So the example it gives on here is the relative effectiveness of the various mechanisms is not known, or effectiveness. So basically, it's trying to communicate that relative is based upon a subject and what happens around that subject. For example, let me look up some kind of examples of relative truth real quick. I'm doing this live right now that it has on here. So we have on Christianity.com here, it says, and John, this is how I study too, so you're kind of getting a glimpse on how I get to study things. I look up what other people say. I try to look in Scripture and stuff. Jesus says in John chapter 18, verse 33, it's the Gospel of John. Pilate is talking to God, and Pilate says, "What is truth?" And it says, retorted Pilate, "With this he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, I find no basis for a charge against him." So even Pilate is sitting here like, what is truth? Like basically saying, what like you say your truth, what is truth? So whenever Jesus was before Pilate here, he was asking, in my opinion, a very important question. The dictionary defines truth as the true or actual state of a matter, conformity with fact or reality, a verified or indisputable fact, proposition, principle, or the like. And it continues to say, when you look at this definition, you begin to see there is a definitive nature to truth. That would be what we call as absolute truth. That's absolute truth. And so absolute truth is based, I believe, in God's nature. Relative truth is the belief that truth changes on the individual's understanding of it. I love that definition. That's a good definition. It's better than the words I could use. It's based on the individual's understanding of the truth. Now, that shows that there cannot be absolute truth because, according to this definition, truth changes. But we know that if truth is based on the character of God, it is unchanging. Unchanging. Again, relative truth based on the subject's perspective or their personal, position on it. So it's kind of like saying that relative truth would be the argument in saying that in the mid to late 1800s and before, slavery was okay. It was true that slavery was okay, but it's true that it's not now. That's relative truth. Absolute truth says, no, slavery is not right. And so slavery shouldn't happen. That's absolutely true. One of my least favorite scenes in movies ever actually comes from my favorite Star Wars movie. It is the Episode 3, The Revenge of the Sith. And again, my favorite Star Wars movie, but it has one of my least favorite scenes in any film. And it's because of my favorite character. I know this sounds super weird, but my favorite Star Wars movie with my favorite character, Obi-Wan Kenobi. And Obi-Wan Kenobi confronted with Anakin Skywalker whenever Anakin basically tells him, Anakin says, "If you're not with me, then you're my enemy." And then Obi-Wan responds, "Only a Sith deals in absolutes." I have a fundamental problem with that. Because one, what Anakin said is not necessarily false. If you're not with me, then you're my enemy. We know that to be true in biblical terms. God says, if you're not with me, then if you are friends with the world, you're at enmity with God. You're an enemy with God. So if you're not with God, you're with something else, which makes you an enemy of God. But Obi-Wan, of course, says only a Sith deals with absolutes. Two things. One, there is a such thing as absolute truth. That is what truth is. It is absolute. Two, based on his own logic and reasoning, he would be a Sith because he just made an absolute statement. He just made the absolute. His claim, the truth claim that we talked about earlier, is that only a Sith deals in absolutes. So, one, it's a self-defeating statement. If he says that, well, is that true? Is that an absolute? Yes, it would be. And so, therefore, based on his own reasoning and logic, Obi-Wan is a Sith. Here, confirmed on the Crosswalk podcast. But that, of course, is faulty reasoning, because there is a difference between absolute truth and relative truth. We cannot sit here and think to ourselves that every kind of truth is based on a person's opinion, because at that point we cannot look at any heinous crime that has happened in the history of the world and say those were absolutely wrong. There's people that actually do not believe in absolute truth, which just baffles my mind. Now, the next question is how can it be reasonable for Christians to claim knowledge of an objective truth? Reasonable. Have a reason to do so. Police officers have to have what they call a reasonable doubt whenever trying to convict somebody or let's say they try to search somebody's car. They cannot have it's beyond a reasonable doubt, or they have to have a reasonable doubt, something that can be reasoned with. For example, if a person's driving down the road, and their car is kind of beat up and stuff, and everything, it's not reasonable to pull them over and try to search their vehicle for any kind of drugs or paraphernalia or anything like that. What would be reasonable if you smelt a pungent smell that can only be of that drug or something of that nature? That would be reasonable. You just looking at it and thinking, "Oh, that looks like a car that would have drugs in it." That's not reasonable. And so, in the same way with this question, how can it be reasonable for Christians to claim knowledge of an objective truth? Because our God is based in truth. Not only is he based in truth, but he is truth. And so it is reasonable to claim that if God, this is what we call an if-then statement, if God is truth, if God is truth, then he speaks the truth. If Christians believe in God, then they believe in the truth. So therefore, if Christians believe God is the truth, then in all reality, they believe that they can come to a objective truth, something that's concrete. And this comes to a point where it's not that I don't like the question. I want to flip the question back on itself: is how can a non-Christian claim absolute truth? How can someone that doesn't believe in every law that we have in this world, doesn't matter what law it is, and doesn't matter what country it's in, it came from somewhere. A law has to have a law giver. And so the same way, for us to have moral laws, there has to be a moral law giver. You cannot say an unbeliever, I don't care how much you try, an unbeliever cannot say that murder is absolutely wrong. They can't do it. They can't say that lying is absolutely wrong. Actually, I know a lot of unbelievers that will actually say that it's not absolutely wrong, that lying is okay in some circumstances. They cannot say that abuse is wrong. Absolutely. They can't say that, because where's their foundation? Now, can they believe these things be absolutely wrong? Of course they can, because they have God's law written on their hearts. They know. It's called our conscience. We know. But without God, why do we even have that? Without God, why is a dog less important than a human being? Why is a cockroach less important than a human being? Why is it not okay to squash a human, but it's okay to squash a bug? If there is no objective morality. We do have objective morality. And if people claim that there is no objective morality, I guarantee you they don't live that way. They don't live that way. So we have a reason and a reasonable thought process of why us Christians should be able to claim the knowledge of objective truth. Next, what is the role and danger of using common sense in quotation in evaluating truth claims? This question's kind of weird. I'm trying to understand it, but what I think it's trying to ask is what we consider common sense. Common sense can be based on opinion, For example, I have no idea how a car works under the hood, most of it at least. But other people may know, because they were raised in that. They're trained in that. And what they see that they've been looking at for practically their entire life, they may think it's common sense because it was common to them. But it's not to me. And so common sense can be based on the person itself. Now, there are common senses that we all should have, not walking out in the middle of the road while into heavy traffic, all that kind of stuff. So it's dangerous because common sense can be dependent on the person's own personal opinion, not based in absolute truth. Like for me, it's relatively, I don't know. Maybe it's just based on my own opinion. That's what it is. It's based on my own opinion. But I think that being chivalrous is common sense. Opening a door for a woman, standing on the other side of them so they don't have to stand on the curb of a sidewalk while walking, or not. I try to sit on the side in a restaurant that's facing the door, not away from the door. All these different things, because it's just kind of second nature to me at this point. But I understand that it's not common sense for other people. And we live in a world that other people claim their common sense is the right common sense, all this kind of stuff. That's why it's important to distinguish between what we consider common sense and what is actually true. Number 13. It says, isn't hell an unreasonable punishment for not believing in a specific set of truth claims? No, it's not. Hell, people don't go to hell because they don't believe in God or truth claims. They go to hell because they've sinned. They've sinned against God. And the thing is ignorance of the law is no excuse. You go into any city and you don't see the stop sign, you don't see the stop sign. Let's use that. You don't see a stop sign and you blow past through it. You're going to get pulled over and given a ticket. Oh, I didn't see it. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. Or if you're running if you're going over the speed limit, but you didn't know what the speed limit was, and you get pulled over, ignorance of the law is no excuse. So isn't hell an unreasonable punishment for not believing in a specific set of truth claims? No, it is not, because it is who who it's against. What we consider unreasonable in our courts today, we look at our court system now, and what's unreasonable is if someone goes jaywalking and then gets a $50,000 get their bail put at $50,000 and has to spend 10 years in jail for jaywalking. That's unreasonable. Now, that's what our laws is set up for, so that these punishments should be unreasonable. But our punishment does depend on who our crime is against. If I go outside right now and I squish a bug, I'm not going to get in trouble for that. No one's going to care. Maybe some wild person that thinks random things, like, you squished a bug, that's so heartless, whatever. But I'm probably not going to get in trouble, for going out and stepping on a bug. But let's say I go outside with my rifle and I shoot a deer out of season. Well, I've committed a crime, and I could get fined for that. Well, let's say I go outside and I punch somebody in the face. Well, I might spend some time in jail and get sued or something because I punched somebody in the face. Well, let's say I go and do that to somebody of much more importance, whether it be political or somebody in office somewhere or in some celebrity. My crime may be increased because of who it was against. Our crime is against a holy and righteous God. And our crime, it has to be, the punishment for our crime has to be proportional to not only the crime, but who it's against. And that's God. And so, no, it is not unreasonable. It's not an unreasonable punishment. People say, well, how can a loving God send people to hell? I have the question of how does a loving God, a just God, not send people to hell? That because of His mercy and grace, we deserve it. That should be our destination. But because of His love and grace, we have hope in Christ. Next question: how can Christians think their personal religious experience with God are any more true than those of adherence to other belief systems? So basically, what this is saying is how can we as Christians come to the basis that our faith is true and others are false? Well, first off, you got to look at the other ones. You got to determine why those things are not true. I'm thinking to myself, my whole thing comes to my own personal belief, but at the same time, the Bible teaches us that we cannot begin to understand spiritual things without the Holy Spirit. We can't do it. But these other religions, I've come to the conclusion, it's like all these other religions says you have to do this, do that, and then you'll earn God's favor. But I'm over here like Christianity tells us we can't do it. It's the only one that's different than every other religion. It's the only one. Actually, I think it's the Quran tells Christians to believe our prophets, to believe our Bible. That's something strange. And then we get in our Bible it says that if anyone else, even if angels preach any other gospel than this, let them be accursed. And then we have, I believe it was John Smith that says an angel came to me, or we have Muhammad that says an angel came to me. Even if another angel comes to you and preaches another gospel, let them be accursed. We also have to look at the facts behind it as well. We have to look at the circumstances around it. Piece the truths together. Not just be like, well, just give me one sentence and then prove to me Christianity's truth. I can't convince. That's the job of God. I'm not the one, and that's not my job. It's not my job to convince you. It's God's job, and He does it, and He does it well. And so how can I determine whether or not my belief is true? It's because of what God has revealed to me and through His Word. And it is a hope that not only I have obtained. Number 15, do all religions ultimately point to the same God? Why or why not? Yeah, this one's easy. No, they don't. They don't point to the same God. Jesus, people will like to think, well, like you have the coexist sticker on the back, which always makes me cringe every time I see it. You have the coexist sticker, and it's like, but not every religion can be true because they contradict each other. The Bible says, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. And then other people will say, well, we have another way. Well, that's contradictory. If Jesus said He's the only way, and these other religions say that we are another way, that's contradictory. Not every belief system can be true. Either all of them are wrong or one of them is right. They contradict each other. And they don't point to the same God. I don't care who tells you this, but the Jews don't worship the same God as the Christians. The Muslims don't worship the same God as the Christians. You know, we don't worship the same God. They don't believe that Jesus is God. That's fundamental to Christianity. And if they don't believe that, they don't believe in the same God we do. And we don't worship the same God. Next one, two more. What are key similarities and differences between the world's major religions: Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism? Similarities. I mean, whenever it comes to similarities, I mean, I can speak, from one basic thing is the teaching of good, trying to do good or whatever. But the thing is, Christianity is the only one that tells us we can't do good. That's a major difference. Outside of God, we can't do good. Everybody else, every other religion says we must do good to earn God's favor. God has told us we can't do good. So I'd say that's one major difference and one major, I guess, similarity in all of that is that they try to do good, but Christianity says we can't. So I don't like this question because ultimately Christianity is so much more different than all the other ones because we actually have hope. Every other religion says that if you do these things, you might be able to. And it's like, what kind of hope is that? And last one, is Christianity a less intelligent worldview than atheism? Why or why not? No. Actually, I love this point, and I don't mean to use like the fallacy of ad populum or the majority. But if you think about this, the majority of people that have won Nobel Prizes in science have been believers in God. Not only that, a lot of them have been Christians. You have Blaise Pascal, you have Isaac Newton, that was a Christian that believed these things. You have Samuel Morse, that believed in Christianity. These men of science and thoughts and reasoning. Blaise Pascal actually said that it is the reasonable and logical conclusion to believe in God because if you are right, then you have gained everything. But if you're wrong, then you have lost nothing. But as a Christian, if you're right, you've gained everything. If you're wrong, you've lost nothing. But if you are an unbeliever and you are right, you've gained nothing. And if you're wrong, you've lost everything. So it's a reasonable thing to believe in God, not only believe in God, but Christianity specifically, because the historical accuracy, the prophetic accuracy, the eyewitness testimonies, one of my favorite things about the Bible and about the truth of Scripture is that whenever the disciples were scattered, they still stuck to the same story. Even John says it in 1 John chapter 1 that these things we have preached since the beginning. Since the beginning. They have not changed their message. He does not change his message. He was 90-something years old probably at this time. He did not change his message. And yet they were all, except for John, all murdered, killed, martyred for their faith. And John was, of course, ostracized to the island of Patmos by himself before he died as well, where he wrote the book of Revelation. And so that goes to it as well. Like people have said that also you have the eyewitness, the 500 that witnessed the ascension of Jesus. It's been said that either, like people have said, well, what about mass hysteria? It would have been more of a miracle for 500 people to hallucinate or have mass hysteria to the ascension of the exact same thing at the exact same moment than for Jesus to actually raise from the dead. Then we have, what about the swoon theory? The swoon theory is basically that Jesus just fainted whenever he was on the cross and that he wasn't actually dead. Swoon theory is very illogical as well because they pierced his side, which included blood and water, which shows the effect of that water built up around the heart, the outside of the heart. And that shows strain on the heart or even a heart attack or something of that nature. And whenever he was pierced, that water happened. He had to be dead for that to even happen. So much strain on the muscles. He could not have survived a full-blown Roman crucifixion. They were masters at killing people, masters at it. So swoon theory is illogical. People say, well, what if the disciples just made everything up? Well, then they died for a lie that they knew was a lie. Now, that's another argument that people say. Well, don't certain like radical Muslims die for their faith? Well, why is their faith less true than yours? Well, because the ones that die now for their faith they don't know for certain. Like that's basically they're on they're having to have this faith to think that this will happen if I give my life. But the Christians, the early Christian martyrs, were there. They would have known if it was true or a lie. They would have known because they were there. They witnessed everything that happened. They would have known whether it was a lie. And you cannot, unless you were crazy, most people don't die for something that they know is a lie. Not something that they believe that is true and then find out that it's not. It's they believed it to be true because they were there when it happened. They're witnesses to what happened. And so they died brutal deaths. Peter said in church history, hung upside down on a cross. Paul beheaded. I believe James, the half-brother of Jesus, was thrown off of a temple, and he didn't die whenever he's thrown off, so they stoned him to death. We have John, who was boiled in oil, but he didn't die, so they kicked him off and put him on the prison island of Patmos. I mean, we have so many deaths. We have the first Christian martyr, Stephen, stoned to death. We have other Christians that have been flogged, flayed, all this stuff that were there and would have known if it was true or not. And so these are good evidences of the truth of the Bible and of God's holy word. And so hopefully, I pray that all this was informative. I pray that that I didn't ramble on too much on any one thing, but I pray that it was informative, and I pray that y'all have enjoyed this first season of the Crosswalk podcast. I hope that y'all join me after New Year's. I pray that you don't forget about me, but Lord willing, I come back and do this when the Lord willing the New Year's comes and everything for season 2 of the Crosswalk podcast. But of course, as always, until then, keep walking in faith. God bless. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to keep supporting this ministry, the best way to do so is to follow the Crosswalk Podcast on the platform you're listening from, and follow our social media pages on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, or also email me at thecrosswalkpodcast923@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep walking in faith.